Erika, welcome to Crew Conversations. I'm super excited to have you as a guest. And we've been talking about this behind the scenes for a few months now, right? And want to just have some great casual dialogue today and dig into a subject that I know you're very passionate about. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to just give anyone that's kind of watching this that doesn't know you firsthand a quick high level overview of kind of your background, where you've been, who you are, whatever is important to you that would be helpful.
All right. Okay. So real quick, and I won't go into a lot of detail because all this stuff is in LinkedIn and everywhere. I've always been in the travel industry, mainly around technology, whether that be on the agency side or on the airline side, kind of always in that space. Very early on in my career, I was in an airline. So again, most of my background always in travel, mainly airlines, technology. But there's one fact that is nowhere. It's not on LinkedIn. It's not really anywhere. So I'll share that because that really ties into the topic. And it's that I actually lived in Haiti for 5 years. And real quick, the reason that this is important, it was when I was about to turn 7. Okay. So these are very important years in the way that they shape your mind. Now, obviously, Haiti, challenging country in terms of their economic status. So I went to an American school there, and all of my classmates, right, for 5 years were representatives of either, the kids of ambassadors or UNICEF representatives or missionaries. The result was you had 24 kids from pretty much every single country you could possibly imagine. What that gave me was a very early on appreciation for being sensitive to different cultures. What would happen is Haiti, not much activity going on. All of the activities would be you would go on play dates to people's houses. Depending the house you were visiting, it's who you prayed to before having your meal, whether you wore shoes or not coming in, and what utensils you used to eat. Very early on, we just knew that if you were going to X person's house, all right, well, it was Krishna and you did certain things. If it was another person's house, then it was Buddha. And as kids, no one cared. It was just the natural way to view people, and it did not make a difference. Skin did not matter, religious beliefs did not matter, the way you ate, the way you dressed, the way you prayed did not matter. So I share that because I do think that as a leader and as an executive and as a human being, that has really, really shaped who I am and the way I see things.
That's awesome story, and I did not even know that about you yet. So I'm glad I asked you that and that you shared that, because it's a really cool nugget. And it says a lot about obviously the subject that we're going to get into today, which is how we can actually maximize in ourselves and our companies, our communities, this inclusive and diverse mentality. And it's early foundation. Many people that you hear that are very passionate about this subject have very early on exposures where, right, the mind is open and it kind of forever stays that way for a lot of folks. I totally empathize with that. That's awesome. So to give us a little bit of the career journey so far, kind of where you've been and where you're at right now, where you hope to be going.
Yeah, so I actually came to the US just 6 years ago. I had never lived here, right? And I always get but the accent, but this, but that. So I'm actually Mexican. I was born and raised in Mexico, moved to the US 6 years ago for a job. I was at Travelport at that time. And since then, I've had different roles within Travelport, then Saver, and now TravelX, which is a blockchain startup. But all through, and actually this blockchain startup is from Argentina, and I'm pretty much the only US employee here. But it's pretty amazing because all throughout, when I first came to the US, this whole diversity thing was like a huge, huge thing. And the gender equality, I'm not saying it wasn't important in Mexico. I'm just saying in the US, it was very front and center. So even the way I spoke, even the way I dealt with certain HR issues, I actually had to be educated because I was very politically incorrect. Not on purpose. It was just kind of the way that, things were done. And even the way I automatically translated certain things, sometimes it didn't come across the right way. But that's kind of where the journey began, because when I came here, there was a lot of awareness around diversity, mainly around three things: gender, sexual orientation, or the African American community. And I absolutely understand all the reasons behind why these three things really, really matter. But when I came, I felt that there was also a journey to be led around cultural diversity that further enhanced this sort of speak around diversity and inclusion. Because many times when I came across, because between the Erika and the Moore, people would say, well, we would never have thought you were Mexican. And I understand, and people were not trying to, however it came across, I understood what people were saying. And so I started to have even more pride in saying, well, whether you know it or not, I do have to translate things in my head. And sometimes that has an impact on the way I come across. So I started, coming across with my teams and telling them, all right, you need to know this about me. When I get really, really tired, I make up words that don't exist because I give up. I can't find the word in English, so let me just make a word up. And I said, but don't worry, you will always know what I'm trying to say. But then I started to see this around, different people and different cultures, and sometimes either the way they were brought up. And because again, from this Haiti story, I know different cultures express respect, express their opinions, express what matters to them in different ways. And, because I am half American, I'll say this, right? Americans are an amazing open culture. And one of the greatest things that they've done is actually place importance in topics like this. But sometimes if you haven't really been exposed to different cultures and different ways of expressing things, it's hard to even understand when someone might be trying to express something in a different way. And it is absolutely not a reflection either on their intellectual capacity or their leadership capabilities. And so kind of raising awareness around all diversity, it's kind of been a journey. So no matter where I am, Travelport Saver, for sure, TravelX, it's yes, all diversity matters. And you really have to make a space for the individual to be able to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah. No, it's powerful. And you've segued us perfectly to where we want to park for a few minutes here, right? Which is on this subject of inclusion and diversity, like you said, right? Being with the Mexican background, with the Haiti experience early on, experiencing the commercial differences in the efforts around and the intent around inclusion and diversity. That it's an important subject. It's being approached in many different ways with varying levels of success. I think we could all agree on, right? And there's always room for areas of opportunity here. And so let's just talk a little bit more about that, right? To your point, I think the thing that I just picked up on the most from you is just holistic diversity, because I agree with you. I mean, outside looking in, it does feel like sometimes the diversity lane can go down niche lanes that to individuals or groups is the most important to them, which you can understand, right? You gotta fight for what you think is underserved and under prioritized. And it's just, how do you do that, but not let other portions or versions of diversity, I guess, fall to the wayside? That's the challenge, right? You want to have full holistic diversity, which includes the cultural piece. How do you scale that? How do you do that when you're a massive or a very large company? How do you get all the leaders to buy into that, right? How do you get the company DNA to really embody that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you actually have to, at the beginning, inject diversity just right out,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
There are, it is very difficult for a company to change and sort of see the inclusion of these things unless there are already representations of different communities or, different backgrounds within the company. Sometimes, I know there's like this thing where it might come across as quotas. It's not so much that it's a quota, is you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know what a different perspective brings to the table until you have actually seated someone with that different perspective. I can tell you there have been companies that I've worked for where it was, and I'll go into a little bit of like the gender thing, strongly male dominated, not in the US, in other countries. And what is considered funny is a certain type of humor. What is considered appropriate is a certain type of behavior. What is considered, and no one's disrespectful. It's just you're sitting there as a woman saying, I really don't think that's funny. It's not offensive. I'm not offended by it. It's just,
Right.
yeah. Or, again, this is very personal, but I'm not a big sports person. And usually it's male dominated environments. Like the scoring of football is like a big thing. And I'm like, okay, can we talk about Christian Dior's new bag collection? Because that's what I want to talk about. I
Right.
really don't care who scored the touchdown, Again, I'm being facetious, I'm making, exaggerating the example, but yeah, or if you have other mothers in the room, right? At some point, the conversation is, yeah, I know, I went to the dance. Dads do it too, of course, and more so, and yay, hooray for that. But if you sway things one way or another, then whether you realize it or not, even the side conversations become sidetracked. And the reason why that's relevant is because we forget we're only human, and humans are about connections. And those connections in the workforce go above and beyond the meeting room. It's being able to connect with people you have common points with. And if there's only a certain type of person, then whoever doesn't connect with those connection points is always going to be an outlier. Always.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, no matter how respectful you make the rules, there's never going to be a true connection. Now, if you put people that are from very different backgrounds, again, for whatever the reason that might have been, then they will actually work harder to find those connection points, and they will find them because we're all humans, right?
That's right.
We all sort of have something in common, but you will go a step further to try to find it. And I think that that's beautiful. And that's the one thing where, to your point, sometimes you just have to inject a few, right? And you can start with whatever type of diversity you want. It does not matter. Just one person at a time. And then, what that starts to happen is when you kind of start at the top, it starts to trickle down, because then that person will then have a diverse team, and that person, will then have a diverse team. So it starts to become a thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like you have to commit to it at all levels, right? I think I've seen and I've heard of so many times where it's being focused on at a certain level of a company, but it has to be all levels, right? Because all levels have to be experiencing in their rooms and in all the side relationships, side conversations, that this is a actual inclusive and diverse atmosphere that I operate in. And as I'm in that and I get the experience of that, I start understanding and seeing the value of it, right? And then when companies asking about expectations around it, I think you get less pushback. But it just really does have to be at every level, entry level to senior level, right? I don't know that you shouldn't be skipping a level when it comes to standards or metrics or expectations around this subject. So I guess some companies, I don't know, maybe they're doing more of that. But so let's talk a little bit more about the piece that you just touched on, which is the blending here of, to move the needle on inclusion and diversity. Like you said, I don't know that there's that many people that really have this really negative intent towards it, right? It's just all these different beginning points that we're coming into this subject on, and then all these different ideas around how you actually make it better or improve on it, right? And I kind of agree with what you just said. I feel like the more that we have personal relationships with people around that are different than us, the more we're all going to open up our minds and get creative and feel more inspired about the need for it in professional settings. I mean, because to you, the reason I feel I hope that most people think I have a generally inclusive and diverse mentality is because I was forced to move my whole life growing up.
Mhm.
And every time I moved, I'm moving to these big cities that were extremely culturally different and very diverse, in the Washington, D.C.s and in the Philadelphias and all of that. And then down into the West Coast cities. And there is such melting pot areas, a lot of military, a lot of, our government and stuff. And so those organizations do a good job having very diverse, folks and backgrounds. And that's where my mind got open, right? And it's forever been open because of that exposure that I had early on in life. And it's through personal relationships that it can make sense for me easily when we talk about it in a business setting. And I also, when I sense people that fight it and are really uncomfortable about the subject, I feel like they haven't had a lot of personal relationship exposure, right, to folks that are different than them, from different backgrounds, cultures, races, what have you. So how do we bridge that gap, right? Like, what can we do better with that?
I think there's definitely, the times are changing. And I think that people, whether it's because, oh my goodness, I don't want to come across as politically incorrect, or because it's truly felt, I don't know, only individuals know at their heart what's really driving it. But because there is such a focus, thank goodness, around these types of things, then whether it's natural or a little forced because it's the right thing to do, people are listening more, right? What I would say is I do think that the driving and the commitment to diversity has to be adopted at the very top of an organization. And I don't care if that's small or bigger, because if you don't start with having the right representation from the people that have a seat at the table, then as diverse as you can be, sort of in the lower layers, those different views don't make it to the top, right? Because then the people at the top layer, the ones that are making the decisions, tend to always make the same decisions. So there almost needs to be a forced approach, at the very top, because that will allow someone at the top will pick up on a particular idea or an openness from something, a concept, innovation, something that is brought on by, kind of that differentiation that starts to bubble up in an organization. And then there's a seat at the table. And then you can have those discussions. And honestly, Adam, to your point, I don't know that I've ever met an executive that wants to do a poor job. I've never met an executive that doesn't want to generate profits, that doesn't want to make their numbers, that doesn't want to be recognized. I've never met someone like that, kind of like no C-suite person ever comes in and saying, oh, Jesus, yeah, I hope we don't make our numbers. Yeah, I hope we don't innovate. Like, that doesn't, like, at the heart, no, everyone wants to do the right thing. But to your point, not everyone knows how. But if you start to create spaces where people say, oh, we adopted this and this was different and this was a different approach and this came from seeing things a different way. And hey, it's benefiting our performance and it's benefiting our revenue and it's benefiting our innovation. It starts to become easier because then you start to sort of read into corporate universal language, which is profit. But guess what? You're also tapping into this more diverse, more inclusive culture. But I do think that, and I would agree that society, for the most part, corporations, for the most part, have started to really make an effort to go in that direction. I don't think we're there yet. But we had to start somewhere, and it's progressing.
Yeah. And what about the cultural diversity piece? How do you think they're doing on that piece of diversity?
I think that there's been, like I said, kind of like the bigger things are gender, sexual orientation and preference, or self-identification, and the African American community here in the United States. Sort of talking about what it is here. I think you needed to start somewhere. You kind of can't tackle everything at the same time. But little by little, the US is a melting pot. Myself, I'm Mexican American. I'm actually both. right? Whether I was born and raised in one country, I'm still American. You know, the more, yes, the more is not very Mexican. It is very American. My father was American, born, raised North Carolina. So you start to be a little bit more open to that. I see a lot more, particularly in the younger generations. There's a lot of pride in I am from, you know, like I am Asian or I am Mexican or I am Colombian or I am whatever the case might be. There starts to be a lot more pride in that and a lot more ownership in that, I guess, than or awareness than there was, you know, kind of in the past. So little by little, my hope is that that begins to open up, and it's kind of the next extension to this huge focus that we're seeing on kind of these three pillars.
Yeah.
And little by little see that those are also elements which affect, you know, profit and growth. Let me give you a quick example. For a global company, right? And this has been seen multiple times, is unless you're able to really understand the psychology of a particular market, if you're just trying to export the way you do things from, you know, from the US, it tends not to work very well. You have to adapt. And they came up with this like global, right? It's global, but with the local feel. That's a little bit more than the local feel. You kind of have to go into accepting and understanding the customs of that region, right? There are countries where the heat from 2 p.m. in the afternoon to 6 p.m. in the afternoon makes it impossible to work. And so, therefore, delivery hours or service hours, they have to be adjusted. And, you know, it's like 6 p.m., you're home with your family. Well, not if you're in those countries. Those countries, that's the second wave of your, you know, job effort. So you have to adjust. And that's all part of running a successful business, let alone that human aspect of caring, right? It's, hey, if for nothing else, for profit, you've got to understand for the sake of profit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a global economy. There's so many global companies now. I mean, most companies are global, right? At least far beyond their initial region. And so it's interesting. Yeah, you're kind of saying you feel like the cultural piece, the cultural element of diversity and inclusion is probably the one that could still experience the largest upswing and is maybe a little bit behind in the US here. Is that fair to say from your
I
view?
think that's fair. I think it's coming a long way. You have
Yeah.
Hispanic month and you have, you know, more and
Yeah.
more things. And it's, and of course, there's larger communities represented within the US.
Yeah.
Again, Hispanic being one that I'm very familiar with. And, you know, I know there's a lot of recognition there. But it's in everything, right? It's in the way you speak. It's in the way you express yourself. I often got the, oh my goodness, are you angry? I'm like, no, I'm not angry. I'm just very passionate. I'm Mexican. This is what you do, right? And it's not only the
Yeah.
Italians, although I think they coined the phrase, but yeah, Mexicans are very passionate too.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's, we get stereotyped, and it's okay. More than anything is understanding that just because I'm being strong about something, I'm not angry. I'm not upset.
Yeah.
We're passionate people. That's the way you come across, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What's the most uncomfortable that you've been made to feel with regards to someone's lack of awareness around this, around
Oh my
inclusion
goodness.
and diversity? I know it's probably hard to narrow down, but
I know. Yeah, I was gonna say, oh, where can I
yeah.
start? I think that some of my most difficult moments were probably around language. Especially when I had just gotten here. There was a lot of, although, you know, I think my English is pretty good, there's vocabulary issues. So at the beginning, you know, I wanted to, like, I was trying to dispute an argument or, you know, like kind of get my voice across. And I was translating still like a lot. And you know, at the time, just someone started taking away the conversation because I was struggling to find the right words. And you know, that's something that I will say is they ran away with the conversation. I have a very strong personality, and because of that, I was like, I don't care, I'm going to get my point across, and even if it took me 5 minutes more, I'm going to take the conversation back, and I did. But there was a split second there where I was like, shoot, I can't do this, you know. And I think that what you need to recognize is not everyone has the same personality. Some people, that's all it takes. And they go back in their shell and then they're not going to speak again. And that's very sad, because if they had something important to say, well, you didn't hear it anymore, right? Because it took them a little bit longer. So that is one. And then the other one, and I'm not going to say any names because we probably know a lot of people in common that know this story, but I was slightly younger, and I was in a conference room, and it was all men. And I had on a very nice black dress, and it was an important customer meeting, and it was, again, all men. I came in, and I was going to be introduced as the new, I'm not going to say the title because then you're going to know what company, but the new, just recently appointed senior executive for this organization, right? And so I was patiently waiting my turn to be introduced. One of the customers, I was, again, only male, all male. And one of the customers turns around and says, "Excuse me, could you bring me some more coffee?"
Oh, wow.
And I was like,
wow.
"Are you joking?" I am very cheeky, very cheeky. So being the person that I am, I was absolutely. So I went, I said, "Do you want sugar and cream?" "Yes, please." "Oh, God bless you, lovely," whatever. I don't know. He was being very, "Oh, sweetheart," whatever. And I was like, "Oh, absolutely happy to." So I went, the creams, the sugars, the whatever, brought him his coffee. And "Do you need anything else? There's snacks." I was like, oh my goodness, wait until this person hears, he's going to want to die. Right.
Yeah.
So I was laughing. I was like, okay, I don't mind at all. And so I'm standing in the background, and sure enough, people come in and they say, "Hey, and we'd like to introduce you to the new head of," and they turn around. You should have seen this poor man's face. He wanted to die. He wanted to die. And I just laughed, obviously, after, said a few words, whatever. And then after the meeting, he's like, I am so sorry. I said, "No."
Yeah.
I was like, in my mind, I was like, "And you should be," right?
Right.
But I
Yeah.
said nothing else, But again, it's those reactions really depend on your personality, and it shouldn't be that way,
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, different person, different personality. Maybe that woman would not have been able to then stand in the room and command it and make light of the situation. And it shouldn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure he did not forget that. So you did the gift in that is you definitely taught him a lesson that he's probably never made the same mistake on again based on that. So
I
kudos to
have to
you.
be honest, I had a little fun with it. So
Yeah. And that's great. That's great that you were able to turn it into that for you, right? And still have the positive impact probably in the end that it needed to be for him. I feel like you've alluded to this a little bit, but I just want to make sure I've given you the opportunity to talk about this thoroughly. Is what mistakes do you think are being made, right? Any mistakes or any areas of opportunity around focusing on the inclusion and diversity subject here?
Yeah. I think there's sometimes, and I see this, and I'm not going to generalize because there's, I've been very fortunate to be a part of many, many groups that, support sort of gender diversity, particularly around supporting women. But I think that sometimes we don't recognize the importance of making sure that we bring men or the non-minority group into making sure that they become allies and advocates. And in full, I will say some of the strongest mentors I've had in my life, they've all been men, right? I probably would not have sort of emerged in my career or maybe had the opportunities that I had if I had not had some very, very strong, sort of mentors and leaders kind of make sure that they embraced the cause, right?
Yep.
And yes, absolutely, right. We need to make sure that sometimes these minorities that, we help one another and you bring others on the journey and you make it easier for people to kind of not have to go through what you did. Absolutely. But if you don't bring in the non-minority group along the journey and make sure that you have advocates within that sort of within that group, then it's really, really hard. I had a boss and I'll call him out. His name is Darren Ricky within Sabre, and many great things about him. But one of the things that, and he knows this, I've said this to him repeatedly, that I think just made a huge difference. He always echoed my voice. It was like, and not only my voice, anybody's voice in the room. And it was just like the most amazing thing. I had never seen someone do it so naturally and effortlessly as he did. I mean,
Give me, Erika, sorry to interrupt. Give me an example of that. Because that's an interesting leadership lesson I feel like you're dropping there that should be highlighted. Is there an example that kind of you remember and can stick out?
100%, millions. So whenever, we would be and I was fairly in a male dominated environment in that role at Sabre. And whenever we were in a meeting, and particularly if senior executives were there, Darren would turn around and say, like Erika just said, and he would make sure that the idea was known to have been mine, that I had the representation. He gave me the microphone. He would highlight my opinions. And you would think, all right, okay, but he would do that with every single female in the organization. And, and I always told him, I said, I don't know if you've noticed this about you, but it's quite unique. And it's powerful because you make people feel they're heard, that they're not invisible, right? And sometimes, again, depending on the personality, sometimes people, when they come across more senior leaders, they quiet down, And unless you have that advocate that pulls you out, or that I've been in other conversations where I say something, and there's books about this, right? And then a male says it, and the senior person says, oh yeah, like Timmy over there. And you're like, Timmy? What Timmy? I said it first, like, what are you talking about, Timmy? It was my idea. And it gets passed over.
Yeah.
Right. And again, and Darren always made it a point of coming back. First of all, giving you back the microphone. And then second, kind of saying, like Erika just said, or like so-and-so just said. So I think that is one thing. And I actually had suggested, it was so noticeable to me that I actually suggested, I don't know whether they did anything with it or not, doesn't matter, but I actually suggested, why don't we do a course for, male white leaders to actually say, okay, these are the examples of things, you need to do. And recently, as a result of the positive intelligence sort of training that I recently underwent with you, Adam, and I really value this, is the repetition factor. And I almost wonder now, would there be the opportunity to kind of, to your point about corporations, say, all right, within any team meeting, make sure that at least 3 times you recognize the idea or the voice of that person in the team that might not be broadly represented.
Yeah.
Again, for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
You start to strengthen that muscle. And that becomes part of the things that you need to master. It's in a meeting, just in a regular team meeting.
Yeah.
How many times did you actually pay or call on the person that is a little bit more quiet? Because maybe their personality, their culture doesn't feel comfortable voicing out things because they find it disrespectful, because they find it out of turn, but when they get called upon, they have amazing things to say. So anyway, that's just a little bit sidetracked, but could work. Positive intelligence and
Yeah.
repetitions, and bringing it all together.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's such a tactical
Yeah.
example of the how
Yeah.
to be an inclusive and diverse leader. We can't just talk about scorecard metrics in the end game, right? You have to teach people to lead differently, and you have to recognize that you're up against, and this is any leader, as we all know, right? We're up against decades of ingrained behavioral patterns, actually generations worth of ingrained behavioral patterns. And so, no one changes their golf swing after one
Absolutely.
lesson in one course, or even after 10. It takes thousands of repetitions, thousands of little, small, simple, tactical things that people can constantly practice in order to start seeing the change. I just don't think we're talking enough about behavioral change for leaders when we're talking about this subject. We're focusing too much on the metrics and the constant expectations. And I think we have to really recognize the way human beings operate, and that it's a long game, right? And I think there needs to be much more deep-rooted tools and things available for folks to make sure that they can shift on the changes that we all seek to see.
There's one more kind of a talking to that in terms of the tactical and the, kind of recognize this. I've also known some exceptional leaders, exceptional. And this is where I truly believe that people do have kind of a good intention. They just don't know any better sometimes, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. Because I've come across some very senior executives, and they actually voice the phrase, I don't care about color or gender or diversity because I don't see a difference. I just see talent. I've heard this, right?
Sure. Yeah, I've heard it a lot.
And then, when you're on the flip side of that, you're thinking, yes, but you're hearing it from the same type of people. Yeah. So the ideas around diversity, they don't come to the top because the diversity doesn't have a seat at the table. So in order to truly, to your point around leadership, behavior, and tactical, is have a couple of people sitting at the table that do represent fundamentally, or a different gender, or a different minority, or whatever you think the case might be. And then you will truly start to see what different opinions, different viewpoints bring, and then make the space for them, right? Because sometimes you'll have, and I got this, the other day I was at a session and it says, oh, I'm the token woman. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, hopefully leaders see it more as the token woman in the group, right? Token female. And they really, coming back to the example, they generate a space for that diversity. So even these people, and I feel in their heart, they really do believe, I don't see color, I don't see gender, I don't see anything, I just see talent. They really believe it, but they're not exposed to it because on a day-to-day basis, in all of their meetings, in all of their sessions, they just have the same type of people. So, okay, see it a little bit, because if you don't see it, then you're not recognizing you don't have it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's an interesting lens to be asking people to think about with regards to this, right? Because the intent there on the I don't see color is, if it's coming from the right place, which you can only be inside the heart and head of that person to know that for a fact, right, is positive, right? Is that I'm a judge-free zone, essentially. But the way that you're saying ultimately, and it's pretty compelling potentially, I think, to think about it this way, to actually be that way, is you actually have to have seen it and validate it. And it's the seeing, validating, right? And allowing the folks to feel significant that are different than you. So can you really be as effective as you want to be with just the blind statements, the blanket statements of, I don't see it? Or is it the fact that you do see it and you can notice, therefore, when it's out of whack or when others around you are not prioritizing it and focusing on it? Like, that's arguably how you lead to this at the most effective way. You actually have to be able to see it, right? And recognize that there are differences and that everyone around you is viewing this from different lenses And so the leaders at the top of that have to have the most sensitive, broad view of that at all times. It's a powerful example I think you gave there,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I do. I mean, personally, I will say I have been very lucky, very, very lucky that whether it's the corporations or the people that I've worked with, have been amazing advocates. So that's something, it's, I'm just so grateful. But it shouldn't be about being lucky, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It should
Yeah.
just be about having the opportunity. So, sometimes all you can do is just make sure that wherever you are, and that is something that I feel very strongly about, is just make sure I do see it and make sure that I am including it, because I do know and I have seen firsthand the value of bringing people in that see things from a different perspective of your own, whether that's because they have a different upbringing or a different feeling about things or a different nationality. It just, it's good, when even when you're putting together your team, you don't want many clones that just think like you.
Yeah.
What's the innovation in that, right?
Yeah.
So it's, and again, it shouldn't have to be about being lucky.
Yeah.
It should be, this is the way things are.
I agree with you. Heck, I don't even want to be friends with a bunch of people like me. It's too much of me. I'd rather my friend circles, I tend to pick out, people that are the opposite of me. Because if I was
Yeah.
only hanging around with people like me, I'd honestly get sick of myself and them as well. So that's how I view my personal life, and I think it totally transcends into the
Yeah.
professional life. Not to make light of that, but there's such power in being around folks that are different than us, that can balance us,
Yeah.
in positive ways. I know we're at time and I want to be sensitive of that. Last question I have, because you are an early, right, adopter and joining member of us here with Crew, and you're a powerful internal resource for the founding member base. And, we don't talk about this a lot, but we're absolutely trying to cultivate what we feel is a need in the networking space, right? I feel like networking oftentimes goes with good intent and sometimes with important needs down very niche lanes.
Yeah.
So we talk about all these problems that we have in the workforce, and then we go into our niche lanes when we're in the networking sphere to talk about them and try and solve them, and right and kind of get vent about them. And I think that's an area of opportunity, and it's one of the core things we're trying to pull together here at Crew, is bring in diversity from gender, from roles, from race, right? Literally diversity from every spectrum that we can possibly capture, as long as we're just, the only credential just being that we're at certain phases of life and career and leadership lanes and executives, et cetera. What is your take on that? Like, how do you feel about where that's going with us so far, and what that can do if we keep doing this the right way as a all-inclusive community?
So I'm going to describe to you, someone asked me the other day, you're part of a lot of networks, and you're part of a lot of things, Erika. Why is Crew different? And I said, well, Crew has very quickly become my professional family. And let me tell you why this is. It's probably one of the most diverse networks I've been in, and yet one of the most heartfelt and warm and closely knit groups. So I think that what I see in Crew is, yes, there is truly a diverse community, and it's not only diverse around the things that we've covered, right? It's also from different industries, it's from different backgrounds, and because the level of entry has been so well sort of thought out professionally, right? So everyone's kind of at the similar stage in their professional career, similar. So what that does, and what I have found, is that when you're part of, the Crew community, and particularly in your cohorts, it's a space where you truly feel safe, and you sort of get stripped of all of your titles, and you're just a person. You're just a person talking to other individuals, and whether they be male, female, transgender, whatever the case might be, it's just individuals sharing life experiences that affect everything in their performance. And I'm not just saying professionally, their performance as partners, as parents, as caregivers, as professionals. But again, it's that baseline, right? Everyone knows coming in that, okay, we're already kind of at a similar stage in our lives. And then it's just about sharing. And the one thing that I think has just humbled me, just above and beyond, is the ability of the people at Crew to go above and beyond and help others with their personal experience, with their resources, with sharing. Adam, I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, there's good people everywhere, thank goodness, but like they just all came together here, and it's amazing. I mean, I think it's very powerful.
Wow.
It gives you an ability to kind of go into different spheres of professional backgrounds. There's all sorts. So people come at, it's almost like this cultural diversity, like there's finance people and there's real estate and there's travel and there's technology and there's startup and there's corporate and there's payments. And everyone has a different background. And yet when we come together, it's just about sharing and seeing how you can help others.
Yeah. And you give me chills as you talked about that, right? I mean, seriously. And thrilled to hear that it's resonating like that for you, because that is what I hope we can continue to do even better, right? Which is bring everybody. If you really, to me, it's like the way you shift the needle on diversity, and we're talking about a bunch of leaders that have a lot of influence in companies and communities and families. So is you get folks that are in influential roles and in leadership type jobs and stuff, and you bring them together and you connect and have them connect on the human side first and foremost. And when you have more and more of that happening, right, it just makes the other stuff, the normally hard to talk about subjects, the delicate subjects, it's just a lot easier to find the common ground, because I feel like I can relate to you better and I can trust you more, and I want to listen to you more and hear you more. And now all of a sudden we can make progress on that. But it kind of has to happen through the human side first. And I think just to me, that was the breakdown I always felt I experienced in networking, is it was the business side first, layering in some human stuff around it, versus no, let's create networking atmospheres that's all about the human side first in its most diverse way, and let the business stuff be the side effect. And I think some of the most profound, challenging topics of our day, inclusion and diversity, mental health, right? All of these things that everyone's trying to figure out, how do we solve, how do we evolve more quickly than we already are actually potentially going to get solved, because you spend more and more time focusing on connecting people as human beings. And together they will then solve these complex issues and these complex challenges that requires a very diverse set of, right, innovative ideas. That's my thing. And I hope we can, it only happens if folks like you and the great people that are joining Crew, right, come together, open up, be real, be safe, honest, and everything. So I'm glad that it's resonated so far.
Adam, I would just end by saying in any topic, whether it's diversity and inclusion or just leadership, it's my golden nugget would be never forget it's just another human being you're talking to. It is always a person. It is always a person that has other things happening in their life. That doesn't mean you don't have performance goals. That doesn't mean you don't have profit measurements. That doesn't mean you're not tracking different things. It just means you need to understand that ultimately the same thing, you have drivers and motivations that make you feel passionate or more important about certain things. It's the same for others. So just take the time to recognize that, regardless of nationality, gender, whatever the case might be. It's always about the people.
Yeah. Awesomely said. And I think it's just the perfect note to end on. So Erika, thank you again. We went for all the time and the candid dialogue. It was fun. It went fast and just greatly appreciated. And thanks for being a member with us at Crew.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Crew Conversations. These conversations are for leaders, between leaders, and by leaders to inspire you to grow into the type of leader you want to become.